news article. Now, a few days ago, this actually appeared on the front page of the BBC News site for a few hours. So we can see here from the title that black women are most likely to die in medieval plague, according to the Museum of London. Now, pardon me, it's not surprising that this appeared on the front page of the BBC News site because two of the subjects that the BBC are particularly obsessed with these days are race and gender. So if we have a look at the article here, it says that black women of African descent were more likely to die of the medieval plague. So that's basically the Black Death in the late 1340s, according to academics at the Museum of London. So it goes on to talk about the research. It points out there that the outbreak is believed to have claimed the lives of 35,000 Londoners. Now that's actually about roughly half the population of London at the time. So this disease killed a lot of people. I mean, can you imagine half the population of London dying now? That's, I don't know, somewhere 4.5–5 million people that would be. So it goes on to say the report, which has been peer reviewed, gives the title of it. It's worth remembering that just because it's peer reviewed doesn't mean it's actually correct. It says it's in this Bioarchaeology International journal, but unfortunately I'm not able to access the study, so I can only go on the media reports here. Advanced copy of the paper was given to the BBC. Now we'll see later why this is particularly interesting, because the BBC has got form on reporting things just because somebody was claimed to be black, and then it's kind of backfiring on them. So go down a bit further. So yeah, it goes on to describe the study, which actually is a small sample size as well. And it says, here we go, it found there were significantly higher proportions of people of colour and those of black African descent in plague burials compared to non-plague burials. And then goes on to describe what the medieval plague was. So, like I say, this was what we kind of normally refer to as the Black Death, which killed a large percentage of the Europe's population at the time. So here we go. While no population figures for black women in London have been recorded, the paper added that during this period, there may have been people in the UK. Now, the interesting thing about this study is apparently it's actually based on some analysis of skulls, and of course we know from some previous studies that it's not an overly reliable method, as I'll come to show you soon. So I can't access the actual study, but there is this page actually on the Museum of London here, where apparently some of the researchers came from. This Rebecca Redfern, I think she's been involved in this kind of thing before. So it goes on about the archaeological evidence and what they were looking for. And if we go down, it's so I don't know whether this is the information that's actually in the study or whether this was from previous work. So it says, focusing on the female evidence, 4 females were likely to be of mixed heritage and 3 were of African descent. Well, they weren't necessarily of African descent, they think they were. It quotes somebody called Geraldine Heng, who studied racism in the medieval period. We'll talk about her a bit later. And then it says, in archaeology, social inequalities can be identified in different ways, and one of which is how people are buried. So it says that when they looked at the skeletons at East Smithfield, they found that none of the plague victims with black African or mixed African heritage had been maltreated, as you might expect if they'd suffered discrimination. So that's quite interesting in itself. Some previous work there, they hadn't actually suffered discrimination. It says we looked at the skeletons for clues, so they were suffering from osteoarthritis in the jaw bones. That was clearly pretty common back in those days with people doing physical work. Pardon me. And there's an interesting phrase here which is normally associated with activism. So it says, in the case of this woman, it provides an insight into her lived experience. Well, of course, the word lived in there is redundant. Experience by definition is lived, but we often find this when people are talking about racism. So if we go to this Wikipedia page, now this is where it gets interesting, because the BBC have got form on reporting supposedly black people based on skull analysis. Actually turned out to be not the case. So there was a skeleton here from a woman at Beachy Head in England, and initially they thought she was from sub-Saharan Africa based on skull analysis. But it was actually later shown, once they did some DNA analysis, that was actually not the case, and that she was probably from Cyprus. So what this Wikipedia page doesn't actually say is that the BBC actually put up a plaque at Beachy Head about this, and the plaque was it was clearly there just because the woman was supposed to have been black, but obviously now it's turned out with more reliable evidence through DNA that she wasn't actually black. So ironically, the plaque has now been removed. So it wouldn't surprise me if the reason why the BBC are reporting this is not because it was actually front page news really. It's just because it fits into one of the subjects that they've really got a particular interest in these days. Almost as though it has to be of interest, something from the deep past, as long as it was a black person. So this page is also worth a quick read. I'll put, as usual, I'll put all the URLs into the description. So Geraldine Heng, who was mentioned in the BBC News article, who supposedly an expert or has studied racism in the medieval period, has written a book, and this page here actually reviews her book and another one, so that's definitely worth a read, but I won't go through it because it's quite a long article. But I think the thing to bear in mind is when you see the BBC reporting on this, look at this carefully, because this may well turn out to be another case of it wasn't really a black person after all, if they do DNA analysis. And it's quite strange if you read some of these articles. It's talking about race as a social construct, but it's actually saying that you can potentially identify some race, at least people from sub-Saharan Africa, based on skull shape. So that certainly implies that there's a biological or anatomical indicator of some aspects of race. So in fact here we can go on to see, it goes on to state, instead we emphasise here that variation by race in susceptibility to and hazard of dying from disease reflects the biological and psychosocial effects of racism. So yeah, I mean, I've no idea whether black people would be particularly more biologically susceptible to bubonic plague than anyone else. But we certainly know that in some cases, certain kind of vague racial groups, can be susceptible to some things like black people, I think, or at least certain black people are more likely to have sickle cell anemia. But because it says here the incorrect and harmful implication that there is a biological basis of race, and we actively oppose that inference, It's kind of strange because they're clearly using anatomy, or at least skull anatomy particularly, to try and identify what they think are black people. Now, it'll be interesting to see if the BBC ever report a follow-up on this, but I suspect that if there is DNA analysis in the future that actually overturns this idea that these were uh, black people, or that they necessarily suffered discrimination. I don't suspect the BBC will be in a rush to report it.